My name is Alexia and I will be doing my video for the Licensure and Employment Regulations assignment. So going off of the questions. So for the state laws and rules, as an occupational therapist practicing in Texas, we are regulated by the Executive Council of Physical Therapy and Occupational Therapy Examiners. So the laws include the Texas Occupational Therapy Practice Act, the Texas Administrative Code, and that has several like licensure, continuing education, standards of practice, license renewal, enforcement and discipline, and so on. The renewal expectations and requirements. So typically, a practicing OT must renew their license every 2 years, usually by the end of the birth month, unless it's like the first time, then it's a little bit different. Or they try to like extend it or reduce it to where it matches the end of your birth month. There is some education, continuing education. There's several hours that you have to do for continuing education. You sometimes have to submit the application renewal fee. Just depends on your employer. We'll be getting into that further. They also require, Texas specifically requires the completion of the human trafficking prevention training program as part of the renewal. What is considered fraudulent behavior? It's usually when you're practicing, of course, practicing with an expired license, I mean. So you definitely want to keep renewing, staying up to date on that. When you're falsifying documentation, so that means we're not putting the appropriate documentation or not associating with the correct patient. Also violating, of course, in all health professions, violating HIPAA, so that means you're violating the patient's privacy rights. And supervision of codas and aids. So as an OT, you are the person that is evaluating. You're also the person that is documenting, and you are initiating and completely doing the intervention planning, while an OTA or a coda actually, or an aid, they cannot provide they cannot provide like the evaluations. They can't modify the treatment plans. Aides especially, they cannot fully practice or service or provide service to patients with skilled occupational therapy. So as an OT, you have to supervise, and you have to know what is your coda or aide's competency, and you have to go off of that. So obviously frequent supervision, because at the end of the day, you're also liable because you are the person that signs off on documentation. So that is under you. Examples of mistakes with license protection. So typically, if you miss like your renewal date, that's kind of a negative. If you're not turning in documentation on time, if you're using the incorrect billing codes, if you're not documenting correctly, because at the end of the day, it also goes to the insurance providers, and they are the ones that need that documentation. Also, in case of any, let's say there is a court trial, then you need that documentation. Also, other mistakes can include posting or violating the HIPAA rights, like I said earlier. So you are putting that patient's information out there. Also just not following through with the OT principles and the occupational therapy code of ethics. That is also a violation that could possibly result in license being revoked. Another thing here, going off of the list, so there is malpractice insurance sometimes by the employer. So when a benefit to that is usually it's free. It comes with the employment. However, sometimes especially like if you're in a big corporate one or a big organization, they typically protect the organization before they protect you. So that might be something to stay on the lookout for. It usually ends when employment ends, so that means that like if you had that malpractice insurance and you quit your job, that would end right there. So you'd probably have to get something separate. So sometimes you don't need additional But if you're on your own, or if you have your own practice, then you need that malpractice insurance, which can sometimes be pretty expensive. So that's another con to it. However, it's also said that a lot of the OTs that with a lot of experience, or maybe in more high risk positions, they have their own additional malpractice insurance because they'd rather be protected than have a job that will say they will protect them and then just kind of leave them out to dry. The different types of employment obviously is like we have PRN, you have part-time, you have full-time, you have independent. So when you're independent, you're kind of like you're your own person, so you're kind of like your own business, and so you have to do your own taxes, you have to do your own documentation, your own insurance, stuff like that. But when you're PRN, it's really flexible. However, you don't always get the full benefits, so there's very few benefits associated with that. And there's not really much structure, in my opinion. You're just kind of wherever you fit in, but it's really beneficial, especially like if you have children and you want to kind of be a full-time mom. You're flexible enough to be able to do that. With a full-time employee, you get a lot of the benefits, so like paid time off, health insurance, liability insurance, there's a retirement, so like your 401k. Okay, and then so when you're an owner, you kind of have to see where you're going to go with it, develop the business plan, kind of go with it, probably get a partnership agreement to where you're getting referrals, because that's how your business is going to thrive. You need those referrals. So you got to network with all these PCPs out there and get those referrals in. However, to become a insurance provider and PI Incorporated, so when you're an insurance provider, you obviously need your Texas Occupational Therapy license. Then you need to get that malpractice insurance. Again, like I said, you always need that. Then you gotta like have a commercial apply with commercial insurance companies. You gotta enroll in Medicaid and Medicaid because they are probably gonna be the primary insurance providers that will pay you for services to the patients, especially if these patients are under Medicare, Medicaid. Rarely do you have self-pay because it does get pretty expensive. And then how do you become incorporated? So you need your LLC or your PLLC. So LLC is more of a typical one. It's limited liability, I believe. And then a PLC is like professional limited liability company, or your corporation or sole proprietorship. So again, you kind of like do this, you register for a business, you register that's separate to OT, you register through the state of Texas. You obtain a business bank account, and you obviously need insurance as well. And then finally, what are some questions I have for my state? So as a future OT and new graduate, I do want to know what I can do, or what are the most common mistakes that new graduate OTs make, and how does that affect their license and their ability to practice. Also, I want to know how often are the supervision or supervision requirements or new requirements updated. Like how often is that? Do they go in there every single year and revise and edit, or how often do they change? I think that's mostly is like how can I avoid any negatives as a new one, because what do I have to be on the lookout for? I wish there was kind of like a guideline, like new OT graduates, this is what you need to stay on top of, this is what you need to do. It's like a checklist, and that way I can avoid like any unethical practice or any my license being revoked. Just kind of staying on the safe side of everything. Also, like, what resources are there that we can know and facilitate the process of knowing like things have changed, like emerging data or changing requirements in the state of Texas, specifically the state of Texas, because I will be practicing in the state of Texas. But I would like to know, how do I stay on top of that without having myself to physically go out and dig? Is there a newsletter that gets out, like this is what you need to do? Is there any sort of mentorship available? So So for OTs with experience, especially the ones that say, oh, I already have additional malpractice insurance, can you guide these new OT practitioners, new graduates, into this next phase? So I think if there was a resource like that, that would be great. Thank you.